So as we've seen, the role of the tutor is to support the student and, most importantly, to sort out the problems that the student might have when they are practicing their writing, when they are actually producing English. As we saw in the first session, the tutorials are integrated into the course. The students practice the target language in a controlled way in Writing Tutorial 1, and then Writing Tutorial 2 is an extended piece of writing on the topic of the unit and also incorporating the target language from the unit. It's important to keep that in mind when sending feedback and not just correct the students' work irrespective of what they have been doing during the course. If that happens, there is a danger that the student as well won't understand the role of the tutorials in the course and won't take advantage of tutorial tasks as an opportunity to practice what we want them to practice, to take on new language and start using it. So what we have done is put together a checklist of things that you need to remember to do when sending feedback on the different writing tutorial tasks. These may seem quite obvious, but it's surprising how often things on the list are forgotten. So, point number 1, when you send feedback to your students, it's very important to come across as a human being and not like a robot. That you seem like a nice, friendly teacher. So always make sure that you begin feedback with something friendly, natural and personal, like, "How was your weekend? It was really nice here. How was it where you are?" That kind of thing. And of course, as you get to know your students, you have much more to comment on, like, "How was your daughter's football match last week?" or whatever. Something to make the exchange natural with real communication rather than just a document with corrected mistakes. The next point, which is also very important, is to correct selectively, focusing on the target language of the tutorial. Each tutorial will correspond to a task where the students are required to practice specific language areas. So first and foremost, those are the areas we need to focus on, because those are the areas we want the student to experiment with and use. This is where it really makes sense to correct and help the student. Making mistakes is a very important step in learning. Inevitably, there will be mistakes in other areas as well, so it's really up to your discretion what you choose to correct. But ideally, they are mistakes that are relevant to that particular student's learning and level. Bearing in mind that the more points you correct, which are not closely related to the content of that unit, the more that the student is distracted from the language that we want them to focus on. So it's important to be aware of the language aims and focus in the unit the student is working on. Also, it's good to keep in mind that a lot of the students are busy people, and sometimes, if you correct fewer mistakes but include clear, concise explanations to help the student to understand, if you correct something it's definitely worth explaining why it is wrong, then this is much more effective than overwhelming the student with a mass of corrections that aren't focused or explained. It's also very important to recognize good use of language and correct use of the target language. Think about in a classroom situation where you have students and you give them back their homework and feedback. You are there with a smile on your face, making encouraging comments about how interesting you thought it was. But in an online context, we don't have that contact or communication. We have to transmit those messages in other ways. So you need to include lots of encouragement and express interest in what the student has written. The next point refers to the organisation of the text, if relevant. That's obviously more relevant to Writing Tutorial 2, where the students do a longer piece of writing, usually in a specific genre, like an email, a report, an article, or a description of some kind. Next, remember to give a mark, so out of 10 for Writing Tutorial 1 and out of 20 for Writing Tutorial 2, and also for the Speaking tutorial. Bear in mind that 60% is a pass, so 6 out of 10 is a pass mark, as is 12 out of 20. We look at the criteria for marking in a minute. Remember to give a mark and to record this mark on the platform. Another important point is, in a lot of these tutorials, the student is encouraged to write about themselves, about what they do, about their families, about their life experiences, things that have happened to them. So it's important to acknowledge that they are sharing something with you and to make reference to that. Otherwise, the experience can seem rather academic and cold, lacking the effective warmth of real communication. Like, If someone explains that they have just changed jobs or had a baby or whatever, and you make no reference to that in your feedback, it doesn't help to build a rapport with the student. And working like this, one-to-one, rapport is extremely important. The last point is, sign off with reference to the next point of contact. So, especially at the beginning of the course, the students won't really know what to expect, what's going to happen next. So when you send feedback on the first writing tutorial, you can send something like, "I look forward to receiving writing tutorial 2 from you soon," or "When would you like to organize the next speaking tutorial?" Reminders about what will happen next. You need to be proactive. The more proactive you are, the more likely it is that the student will work through the course material. Good. Now moving on to look at the criteria for writing tutorial 1, you can find this information in the tutor's manual. So for writing tutorial 1, as it is so specific and is clearly controlled practice of the target language of that unit, it's not really necessary for us to give you a marking criteria. The mark you give should relate to the level of the student and the language produced in relation to the task requirement. Remember, though, that you want to be encouraging and you want to give the student good marks to make them feel good about the experience. This is not a test. This is an opportunity to engage in guided practice. On the other hand, if you start off by giving a student 9 or 10 out of 10, they can only really go down in future tutorials, which could be a bit discouraging. So at the beginning of the course, it's probably a good idea not to give students maximum marks, as it doesn't leave you with any margin as the course continues. Obviously, this is up to you and your intuition. For marking writing tutorial 2, we do have criteria, which we strongly suggest you use. If you don't use it, there is a danger, depending on the teacher and their beliefs about language learning, you might tend to focus on specific areas. A lot of teachers will just focus on grammar without realizing that they are doing this, and if a student's grammar is particularly weak, being harsh on them is probably not going to be motivating for them. So what we suggest you do is award a mark for task achievement. Does the content match the task specifications? So a mark out of 4. It's good to keep in mind that these are courses, they're not exams or exam preparation. The idea is to guide and offer support and encouragement rather than penalise students for their mistakes. And there is also a certain amount of flexibility in the tasks so that students can adapt them to their own context and needs. This is perfectly valid and should be encouraged. Point 2 is range, complexity and accuracy of grammar, a mark out of 4. Vocabulary range and accuracy, a mark out of 4. Style and layout, which refers to the register, formal or informal, and the organisation of the text, a mark out of 3. And then the overall effect on the reader. Is it coherent and communicative? Does it get the message across? Would someone who is not a teacher or tutor understand it? What effect would it have on them? And that's a mark out of 5. So then you add up those marks and the total should give you a balanced mark out of 20 for a piece of written work. This is a useful tool for tutors, but we don't recommend that you give students this breakdown, just the total mark. You will of course mention these different areas in your feedback, but there's no need to give the students the partial scores. Good. So writing tutorial 1 comes in the middle of the unit, after the students have had most of the input and covered most of the language focus. Now I'm going to show you 2 examples of tutor feedback. The first one is a bad example and the second a good example. So here is the bad example, and as we can see it's quite abrupt, unclear in terms of what is correct or incorrect and why. In fact, there's no explanation at all, and the student is going to be left none the wiser. What's more, there's no friendly introduction or genuine response to what the student has written. I mean, if you were studying a language online, would you like to receive this feedback? I don't think you would find it very helpful. Here is the checklist again to remind you of what the feedback should include. And here is the good example of feedback on the writing tutorial 1 task. So, in the example, colour is used to distinguish between what the student has written and the tutor's comments, and the feedback starts with a personalised message. Dear Susanna, thanks for sending me this tutorial. and there's a general comment and response. And have a look at my comments below and let me know if you have any questions. So, a friendly, personal greeting and some chit-chat at the beginning referring to what the student has sent. This Writing Tutorial 1 task is controlled practice of modal verbs of probability. We can see here that the student copied in the task instructions at the top. And then below we can see what the student wrote, and that the tutor is commenting on both correct and incorrect use of the target language. In example B, the tutor gives the correct example and highlights, in this case, the missing verb, along with a tip about repeating the relevant exercises that practice this particular grammar area, which is also listed here. In example C, the student's example is more or less grammatically correct, but the tutor has rephrased it to make it sound more natural. Then D and E are correct, so the tutor has mentioned that. And in H, another concise explanation or tip to help the student to understand what the problem is. And continuing, scrolling down, here we have the second exercise in this particular tutorial. And here the student has written a description of rules of a game. As this is a paragraph, the tutor has highlighted and numbered things to correct and added comments below. Organising feedback like this ensures that the student's original text remains clearly visible and intact. So, number 1 is just a spelling mistake. For 2, we can see that the student has used the wrong verb, so the tutor explains why beat is wrong and gives an example. You beat a drum, etc. And also 4, the difference between hit and throw. So this is picking up on the target language of the unit, as this particular unit is about sport and is helping the student to improve on what he or she has written. Also, the tutor doesn't correct everything. He has been selective in what he has commented on, choosing things that are relevant to this unit and the student's level, and has given clear examples and explanations when necessary. If the tutor corrects everything, it can have a negative effect on the student, and also it can be overwhelming, whereas if the feedback is focused and relevant, it gives the student a clear, manageable amount of information. Then at the end, the tutor gives a mark out of 10 as this is a Writing Tutorial 1 task, and then a comment on what the student has to do next, in this case the Writing Tutorial 2 task for this unit. To sum up, this is a simple and effective way of organising feedback, but it's up to you how you choose to do this, keeping in mind that the feedback needs to be clear, concise, relevant and useful. Clarity is the key. So it's very clear what's right, what's wrong, with a brief explanation, but not overcorrecting. And remember that the tutor has a limited time to write feedback, approximately 15 minutes for writing tutorials. As the tasks in Writing Tutorial 2 are generally longer texts, the feedback for these would normally be along these lines, highlighting and then commenting below. As the Writing Tutorial 2 task is freer practice and more personalised, there is more opportunity to comment on what the student has written about. Also, in Writing Tutorial 2, the student can choose from 2 possible tasks. The first alternative is usually more directly linked to the unit, and the second a more general take on the topic, with more opportunity for the student to personalise and write about work or experience or life in general. So, in this pre-advanced B2 Plus unit called the ball game, Alternative 1 is writing a description of a game you used to play, with a list of things to mention. Where you played it, who you played it with, how the game was played, and why you liked playing it. And in Alternative 2, the student can write about sport and recreation in general nowadays, in approximately 180 to 220 words. And here we have feedback on the student's writing. As you can see, the tutor first responds to what the student has explained. This game sounds like fun, etc. It's really important to do this, to value what the student has gone to the trouble to explain to you. And then the tutor gives a general comment, picking up on positive things, giving encouragement, and then suggesting further practice the student could do. And then the corrections and explanations are below, with the mark, and the reminder about what happens next. That's the end of this training video on how to tutor on Net Languages courses.